soda. That was great.
8:38 here, Big 550 KTRS. Our next guest was in Argentina for the last 2 weeks. No, not looking at their parliamentary procedure. He was on his quote-unquote honeymoon. Joe Miller for the Show Me Institute policy analyst. Good morning, Joe Miller.
Good morning. And I did look into their political politics for sure.
Wow. Then if your wife allowed you to look into that on your honeymoon, you married the right woman. That is for sure. Did you drive today? How'd you get to work today?
Metrolink, actually.
Metrolink again. We'll get some of that later. But let's talk a little fuel tax here because we are coming down to the final moments of the legislature. Where are we with all this funding of the roads?
So right now there is a proposal in the state legislature that would have a vote go before the people on a 5.9-cent fuel tax increase. And that would raise a couple $100 million a year for MoDOT. It's a little bit less ambitious than, say, something like Amendment 7. And we've always thought at the Show Me Institute that if you're going to raise more funds for the road, it should come from people who are actually using the roads. And fuel tax is one way that can be done.
Right.
So it's more fair and it's more economically sound. And it's better than some of the other proposals out there right now where you have a ballot initiative right now that would actually use cigarette taxes to pay for roads that might now get on the ballot, which is the exact opposite of fair or economically sound.
What are you going to do, though, when you get these Chevy Volts and these Teslas and some of these cars that don't use gas drive on the roads?
That's actually a really good point. Right now, we're already sort of seeing some. I mean, if you go down the street in St. Louis, you'll see some Teslas every now and then.
Right.
And those are completely electric. There's multiple ways of getting at people who are using electric cars to help pay for the roads. And you could have a higher sales tax for those types of cars. You could go to a mileage-based user fees. You could use tolls. But for right now, the last couple of years, fuel tax consumption in Missouri has actually been going up. So we might reach Armageddon levels with fuel consumption, in which case the fuel tax isn't going to work anymore, and we need to find another user fee.
Right.
But at this point, at least for the near future, it doesn't seem like that's happening right now.
Yeah. It is interesting, though, because as more and more people use more and more electric cars, they're not using it's a user tax, but not for them. So we'll see what happens there. All right. Well, what's the latest with Uber? What's going on here?
Well, Uber, right now, obviously, we are in twilight zone in the St. Louis area where we have Uber operating. I've used it many times.
I used it illegally Saturday night. I loved it.
Yeah, I mean, we're in this area where Uber says they can legally operate the Metropolitan Taxi Cab Commission, which regulates Uber and taxis in St. Louis City and County, says no, you can't. And basically, the city has not been enforcing the MTC's the Taxi Cab Commission's statements. So we have this system where people have been using and enjoying Uber, and now at the state level, we might finally come in and have statewide regulations. And most states now in the United States have ride sharing or Uber and Lyft. They have those regulations at the state level now. So we wouldn't be strange. Most of the neighboring states around us actually do have that.
Would this legislation put the taxi cab companies and Uber on the same playing field?
You know, that's a difficult question because they have very different regulations. So there is talk of maybe still allowing requirements for fingerprinting, not actually saying that it has to be done, but maybe putting it in place in the future on Uber and Lyft. Uber and Lyft would actually have to pay a very large upfront fee to operate, about $5,000, whereas, a taxi company, they operate under different rules, and if you're getting a taxi permit, it's a couple $100s. So they're actually treated like different markets. Frankly,
why should they? I mean, they're kind of the same thing.
I completely agree. I would like to see less regulation on all of these companies. I think that consumers should be able to choose their level of service, their level of regulation on different companies themselves. But in this case, I think that I would prefer to see statewide regulation over Uber and Lyft simply because local governments like St. Louis and the Metropolitan Taxi Cab Commission and other places in the state have really shown themselves to be kind of captured by local taxi interests in this concern. And I think that, less regulation of any kind is really going to help the consumer. It's going to mean that next month we might not get kicked out of the ability to use Uber or Lyft.
Right. Well, it's interesting in that I think, and I have no expert knowledge of this, but I would think people would like some general checking of who's driving the car or the cab, right? Because you have women who are using it who are being dropped off at their home. right? So you at least want some level of protection, knowing that this guy driving me has been checked out and hasn't raped 16 women in the last 6 months, right? So there's some level of safety there, but it should be all the same, regardless of what level of regulation there is.
Actually, I'm not sure that it should all be the same because, when we're talking about what we're willing to do, what kind of options we're willing to take, there's different levels of safety all over the place in our world. Some people drive motorcycles or ride motorcycles, and that is much more dangerous than riding a car. You have that option, you have that right as an American, as a St. Louisan. I think that there's no problem with one group of taxis or one group of people driving saying, we have the best security, we have the best background checks, check us out, we're much better. Uber and Lyft are not some fly-by-night companies. People can check what their regulations are. And, if somebody says, I think that the way Uber is doing their background checks is good enough for me, and I am okay with that, then I think that's fine. And I think if somebody wants a higher level of safety and is willing to pay for that, then that should be part of the market. We should be able to self-regulate and choose our level of regulation. And that way we would have a lot more options.
So you don't think there should be a minimum level of checking, whether it's a background check or maybe not a fingerprint, but at least a check to make sure that they're not, whatever?
I think that some very minimum standards are necessary, and those aren't too hard to get to. You'd get really wide agreement on that. Like, if you are somebody who is a 5-time felon, you're not going to be able to drive a car. If you're somebody who's been drinking and driving, Uber already does that themselves. People wouldn't take your service if you didn't do that necessarily. Right. And I think that we could have those standards. We do have vehicle standards in Missouri, but I think that when you have these special commissions to come up with all these rules on how to regulate not only ride sharing but taxis and everything else that moves on wheels, you get to see what you've seen in St. Louis. And I tell you, go back and look at the taxi cab code before Uber and Lyft came in here, because they weren't just regulating safety. They had gone on to regulating business activity
right.
and controlling the market, and that's where they end up going with this stuff.
There is something to be said, though, for Uber and Lyft, because when I took it Saturday night, you can instantaneously say, this guy's trouble, get him off the road immediately. If I were to have taken a cab, I'm not so sure I would have fuddled around with what phone number do I call to tell somebody this is a bad driver.
And I would point out that the people who want to put up more regulations with safety on Uber and Lyft, that where is the evidence that these are actually more dangerous than taxi cabs? We've even had, the idea of a crazy taxi driver is actually ingrained in the American consciousness.
Right, there's almost a term of endearment.
When I see new regulations, more tough regulations going up on somebody, I want to see evidence that they need it. I don't want somebody to just give me hypotheticals. And frankly, they're like the people who want these tougher regulations, they're the ones who are saying that there's such a big problem out there. I want to be shown the problem. And frankly, no one ever bothers to do that.
Ladies and gentlemen, he is clearly rested and enjoyed his 2-week vacation on his honeymoon down in, where was it, Argentina?
Argentina, yeah.
Did you bring back any wine for us?
Oh, tons of wine.
There you go. Did you break any tariff laws doing it?
Well, hey, new liberal regime in Argentina in the last couple of months, so now's the time to go.
Ladies and gentlemen, Joe Miller loving the liberal regime down in Argentina. That's a topic for another day. Show Me Institute policy analyst. Get back on the Metrolink. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
846 here, Big 550 KTRS. Has anybody seen the list of Muni shows this